The August sun hung low over the Montana plains, painting the weathered barn in shades of amber and gold. Jack Morrison stood beside his German shepherd, Duke, studying the structure that now belonged to him. The barn rose 3 stories high against the endless sky, its wooden planks streaked with age and neglect. Half the building still wore its original yellow paint, while the other half had faded to bare gray wood, as if time itself had given up halfway through its work. Jack was 62 years old, with calloused hands and a weathered face that told stories he rarely spoke aloud. He wore a plaid shirt tucked into worn jeans, and a dusty cowboy hat shaded his eyes from the late afternoon glare. Duke sat patiently at his side, tongue hanging out, watching his master with the devoted attention that only a good dog can offer. The barn had belonged to Jack's uncle, Martin Holloway, a man he had barely known. Martin had lived alone out here for 40 years, keeping to himself, bothering no one. When the lawyer called to say that Martin had passed and left everything to Jack, it came as a surprise. Jack had been living in a small apartment in Billings, working odd jobs since returning from his second tour overseas. The inheritance was unexpected, but not unwelcome. He had arrived 3 days ago to find the property exactly as the lawyer described, remote, quiet, and in desperate need of attention. The barn dominated the landscape, standing alone on a gentle rise with nothing but grassland stretching in every direction. The nearest neighbor was 7 miles down a dusty road. The nearest town, Clearwater, was 15 miles beyond that. Jack had spent those first days cleaning, exploring, and beginning to understand what his uncle had left behind. The ground floor of the barn was mostly empty, with space that had once held farm equipment and vehicles. The second floor contained living quarters, surprisingly well maintained, with a small kitchen, a bathroom, and a bedroom that looked out over the plains. The third floor was a hayloft, mostly empty except for some old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. But it was the basement that interested Jack most. He had discovered it on his second day, finding the trapdoor hidden beneath a worn rug in the corner of the ground floor. The stairs led down into darkness, and when he finally got a light working, he found himself in a space that his uncle had clearly used for storage. Metal shelves lined the walls, holding canned goods, water containers, and various supplies. In one corner sat an old gun safe, locked and imposing. Jack had the combination. The lawyer had given it to him along with the deed. But he had not opened the safe yet. Some instinct told him to wait, to understand this place first before discovering what secrets his uncle had kept locked away. Now, as the sun continued its descent, Jack turned and walked back toward the barn entrance, Duke following close behind. The air was cooling, and the grassland had begun to whisper in the evening breeze. Jack felt something he had not experienced in years, a sense of peace. Out here, with nothing but sky and land around him, the weight he had carried for so long seemed lighter. Inside the barn, Jack climbed the stairs to the second-floor living quarters. He had set up a temporary camp there, with his duffel bag in one corner and supplies on the small kitchen counter. He prepared a simple dinner of beans and bread, sharing pieces of the latter with Duke, who accepted them with gentle dignity. As darkness settled over the plains, Jack sat by the window, looking out at nothing and everything. Stars began to appear, more than he had ever seen in the city, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional creak of the old barn settling and the soft breathing of his dog. Jack thought about his uncle, about what kind of life Martin must have lived out here. He thought about his own life, about the years in uniform, about the things he had seen and done. He thought about how strange it was that after everything, he had ended up here, in this forgotten place, starting over at an age when most men were thinking about retirement. He was still sitting there, lost in thought, when Duke raised his head. The dog's ears perked forward, and a low rumble started in his chest. Jack immediately went still, his body responding with the trained awareness of someone who had learned to trust such warnings. He reached over and placed a hand on Duke's head, quieting him, then moved away from the window. In the darkness outside, he saw them. 3 sets of headlights, moving slowly up the access road toward the barn. They had their lights off at first, but as they got closer, someone must have decided it did not matter anymore. The vehicles, pickup trucks from the look of them, spread out as they approached, taking positions that surrounded the barn. Jack's mind worked quickly, assessing the situation with the cold clarity of his training. This was not a friendly visit. Nobody came to a remote barn at 10 o'clock at night with their lights off if they had good intentions. These men were here for a reason, and that reason was likely the same thing that had kept his uncle isolated out here for so many years. They knew about the barn. They knew about what was inside. Moving quietly, Jack descended the stairs to the ground floor, Duke following silently behind him. He went to the corner where the trapdoor lay hidden and pulled it open. The basement stairs disappeared into darkness below. Jack flicked on the light and descended quickly, his heart steady despite the danger. He went straight to the gun safe and spun the combination lock. The door opened with a heavy click that echoed in the small space. Inside, Jack found exactly what he expected. His uncle had been prepared. There were rifles, a shotgun, and several pistols, all well maintained and properly stored. Ammunition was organized on the upper shelf, labeled and plentiful. Jack selected a rifle he knew well, checked it with practiced efficiency, and loaded it. He took extra magazines and placed them in his pockets. Then he grabbed the shotgun for good measure. As he turned to go back upstairs, Jack noticed something else in the safe. A notebook, leather-bound and worn. He grabbed it and tucked it into his shirt. Whatever information his uncle had recorded might prove useful. Back on the ground floor, Jack could hear voices outside. The men were not trying to be quiet anymore. They were confident, expecting no resistance. Through a gap in the barn wall, Jack counted 6 of them, maybe 7. They wore dark clothing and carried weapons openly. These were not amateurs. Nobody's lived here for months, one of them said, his voice carrying in the still night air. Old man Holloway's been dead since spring. Place is empty. Then this'll be easy, another replied. Boss says there's enough equipment down in that basement to set us up for years. Military surplus, supplies, maybe even cash. Old man was paranoid as hell, probably has a fortune stashed down there. Spread out, a third voice commanded, deeper and with more authority. Check for signs of anyone around. Johnson, you and Peters get ready to breach. Rest of you cover the exits. I want this done clean and quick. Jack moved to a position on the ground floor where he had a clear view of the main entrance but remained hidden in shadow. He set the shotgun against the wall within easy reach and raised the rifle to his shoulder. Duke crouched beside him, silent and alert, sensing the tension in his master. The men approached the barn entrance. 2 of them carried crowbars, preparing to force the door open. The others fanned out with their weapons ready, scanning the darkness. Jack's voice cut through the night, calm and steady. That's far enough. The men froze. Several of them brought their weapons up, searching for the source of the voice. Who the hell is that? The leader demanded. The owner of this property, Jack replied. You're trespassing. Turn around and leave, and we'll call this a mistake. There was a moment of silence. Then someone laughed. There's 7 of us and 1 of you, old man. You want to rethink that suggestion. I've given you fair warning, Jack said. What happens next is your choice. The leader stepped forward, his weapon raised. We're coming in. You can die trying to stop us, or you can get out of the way. Either way works for me. Wrong answer, Jack said softly. What happened next took less than 30 seconds, but it unfolded with the terrible efficiency of a man who had spent years learning how to survive in situations exactly like this. Jack had the advantage of position, preparation, and experience. The men outside had numbers and arrogance. It was not a fair fight. Jack's first shot took out the spotlight one of the men was carrying, plunging that side of the barn into darkness. His second shot hit the ground 2 feet in front of the leader, kicking up dirt and making his intent clear. Duke began barking, the sound amplified by the barn's interior, making it sound like there were multiple dogs inside. The men scattered, taking cover behind their trucks and returning fire, but they were shooting at shadows and muzzle flash. Jack moved after each shot, never staying in one position, using the barn's interior to his advantage. He did not shoot to kill, but his shots were precise enough to make it clear that he could if he chose to. One man tried to circle around to a side door. Jack put a round through the door frame above his head, sending splinters flying. The man dove for cover and stayed there. Another attempted to rush the main entrance. Jack dropped him with a shot to the leg, sending him sprawling and screaming into the dirt. Fall back. The leader shouted, "Fall back." The men retreated to their vehicles, dragging their wounded companion with them. Engines roared to life, but Jack was not finished. He stepped out into the doorway, clearly visible in the moonlight now, and raised his rifle. "Leave the weapons," he called out. "Like hell," someone shouted back. Jack's next shot took out the front tire of the nearest truck. His second shot took out the back tire. The truck lurched and settled. "I can do this all night," Jack said calmly. "You've got two choices. Leave the weapons and drive out of here in the other vehicles, or stay and see how this ends. Your call." There was furious whispering among the men. Then, one by one, weapons were tossed into the grass. The injured man was loaded into one of the remaining trucks. Engines revved, and the vehicles spun away, taillights disappearing into the darkness. Jack waited a full 10 minutes, watching and listening, before he lowered his rifle. Duke sat beside him, finally quiet, pressing against his leg. Jack reached down and scratched behind the dog's ears. "Good boy," he said quietly. He gathered the abandoned weapons and brought them inside, then secured the barn. His hands were steady, his breathing calm. The adrenaline would come later, in the quiet hours before dawn. For now, there was work to do. Back in the basement, Jack sat down and opened the leather notebook he had taken from the safe. His uncle's handwriting filled the pages, neat and precise. As Jack read by the dim light, he began to understand the life Martin Holloway had lived. His uncle had not always been a hermit. He had been army, like Jack, and he had come home carrying his own weight. He had bought this land and built this place as a refuge, somewhere he could exist without the noise and chaos of the world pressing in on him. But over the years, people had learned that Martin was prepared, that he had supplies and equipment. Some saw that as an opportunity. There had been other attempts, Jack learned from the notebook. His uncle had dealt with them quietly, firmly, without ever calling the authorities. Out here, you handled your own problems. The men who came tonight were not the first, and the notebook contained names, dates, and descriptions. Martin had kept careful records. On the final page, written in slightly shakier handwriting, was a message clearly meant for whoever inherited the property. To whoever reads this land is worth protecting. Not for what's in the basement, but for what it represents. A place where a man can stand on his own, live by his own rules, and find peace if he's willing to work for it. I hope you're someone who understands that. I hope you're someone who'll fight for it. Good luck, Uncle Martin. Jack closed the notebook and sat in the quiet basement, feeling the weight of those words. He thought about the men who had come tonight, about how they had expected an easy target. He thought about his uncle, living out here alone, defending this place for 40 years. And he thought about himself, about what he wanted from the years he had left. When dawn broke over the plains, Jack was still awake. He climbed to the third-floor hayloft and stood at the open end, looking out over the land. The morning light painted everything gold again, washing away the darkness of the night before. The grass moved in waves beneath the wind, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk circled on rising thermals. Duke joined him, sitting patiently as dogs do, content just to be near. Jack had made his decision sometime in those quiet hours. This was his land now. This barn, this piece of Montana sky, this hard-won piece. He would do what his uncle had done. He would protect it. He would make it his refuge, his place to stand. The men from last night would tell others what had happened. Word would spread. Some would be deterred. Others might try again. But Jack Morrison had spent too many years learning how to defend things that mattered. He had the skills, the training, and now the motivation. He also had something more, a purpose. In the days that followed, Jack began to truly settle in. He repaired the barn's roof, fixed the broken windows, and organized the basement more efficiently. He drove into Clearwater and introduced himself to the local sheriff, a weathered man named Tom Brennan who had known Uncle Martin. "Heard you had some trouble your first week," Sheriff Brennan said, studying Jack with knowing eyes. "Nothing I couldn't handle," Jack replied. Martin said the same thing, every time I asked. The sheriff smiled slightly. "Suppose it runs in the family. You planning to stay?" "I am." "Then you should know. The men who've been eyeing this place for years, they work for a man named Garrett. He runs things in the county that the law can't quite touch. Your uncle stood in his way, and now you're doing the same. Good, Jack said simply. Sheriff Brennan studied him for a long moment, then nodded. If you need anything, you call. But I suspect you won't. Jack drove back to the barn as the sun set, Duke's head hanging out the passenger window. When they arrived, Jack stood outside for a moment, looking at the structure that was now his home. It was not just a barn anymore. It was a statement, a line drawn in the dust. A place where a man could make his stand. Inside, Jack sat down and began his own notebook, continuing the record his uncle had started. He wrote about the attempted raid, about the men and their threats. He wrote about his decision to stay, to defend this place. And on the last page, he wrote a message for whoever might come after him, decades from now. This land is worth protecting. Not for what's in the basement, but for what it represents. I understand that now. I'll fight for it, just like Uncle Martin did. And I'll make sure it's here for whoever needs it next. Jack Morrison. Outside, the Montana stars emerged once again, countless and bright. Inside the barn on Holloway Ridge, a veteran had found his mission. Not the one he expected, but the one he needed. Duke settled at his feet, and Jack Morrison allowed himself something he had not felt in years, a sense of being exactly where he belonged. The barn stood solid against the night, a refuge defended, a promise kept, a home earned.